Ryan, thank you so much for making time today. Obviously, all your support and help with 1911 efforts. It's going to be fun to kind of share with the audience a little bit more about you. But as we always do when we start, we'll ask if you would please introduce yourself to our
Of
audience.
course. Thank you for having me here right off the bat. I'm Ryan Ball. I'm from Baton Rouge. I went to SMU, was class of '08. And now I own and operate a logistics brokerage firm called Rockwall Services.
Awesome. And having known you for a while, I know you as someone who's very business oriented, but in a unique lens. You're always looking to fix things. You're very entrepreneurial. So it's been fun to see you in this journey of owning your own business. But before we kind of get to what the majority of what we'll talk about today, I like to start with kind of your origin story. How did you find SMU and make that your college choice?
Yeah, so it's somewhat of a legacy cliche. Both of my parents went to SMU. My dad played football there in the '70s. My parents are both there at the same time they met. I have aunts and uncles that all went there. And if you know me, I'm not a very like big follower, so it's outside of the norm. So it wasn't simply that because my parents went there. I just had a lot of exposure to it and was able to see over time what an amazing place it was. Truly unique and special. And there were other schools that I was looking at, but it was definitely my favorite. And I've got a partial scholarship for mechanical engineering, which made it even easier. I was like, okay, I'll just do this. But there was definitely a point where it was between that, and I think Georgia Tech was one of the other big competing schools, just because it's a good engineering school. But I was just like, I think I'll get a lot more of non-intrinsic value out of SMU. Like, this is just a much more unique life experience, and so far that seemed to be very accurate.
And so you mentioned the engineering component to SMU. Is that what you were truly focused on? You mentioned Georgia Tech. What was 18, 19-year-old Ryan like, and what was the interest in school, and like kind of how did you see that building into a career?
Yeah, so 18-year-old Ryan thought he was gonna conquer the world, like, pretty quickly,
Hmm.
which is very, very naive. I thought at that time, I've always been extremely mechanically in tuned. It's very intuitive for me to
Hmm.
like take something apart, put it back together, figure out how it works.
Hmm.
Engineering was I wouldn't say it was easy, but it just made a lot of sense for me. So I thought I would get into something like defense contracting or something like that. I was just a crazy
Yeah.
18-year-old kid who thought that
Yeah.
was going to be my path. I didn't really have my heart in that industry specifically. And then the more I learned about engineering and the environment of being an engineer, um, realized that maybe it wasn't right for me. I'm not really the norm. I'm extremely gregarious, and I'm not saying there aren't gregarious or outspoken people in the engineering world, but I just it seemed to be the minority. And then also at the same time, growing up, I was always putting together some sort of business. I had I worked construction, and then I had a lawn care thing, and then I was making uh, bootleg movies for my friends at school, and kind of turned that into a thing, which is not legal, but whatever. It's the statute of limitations is up. And
There
then
you go.
eventually, some buddies and I got a business plan together and got a loan from a bank, and we bought a snowball stand, snow cones for people that aren't from Louisiana. And I was just always doing things, and engineering made sense. There's not really an entrepreneurship curriculum in school. There's, business or maybe economics and finance. And then you go to business school. But I just thought that engineering was more practical. So I did that, but, pretty quickly. And part of this was because of the help of SMU's co-op program. So if you're not familiar with the co-op program, they give you a full-time job related to your major. You're still a full-time student, but you
Mm,
don't take any classes. And I did this my junior year,
mm.
and I worked for a company designing natural gas regulators, which is as exciting as it sounds. And that kind of gave me the exposure to sort of the cultural position that engineers fit in most companies,
Uh,
and I just didn't think I was gonna be happy there. I thought I would be much happier on the business side of it. So, like, maybe there was that track of going through engineering, learning the business, and then jumping over to the business side, and then you're that double cut
yeah.
person. Um, but ultimately, I just didn't have my heart in any of that at the time. I kind of got burned out, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I finished the degrees. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and a mathematics degree, but I was really interested in making movies. Funny enough.
Uh-huh.
During my last semester, I started working part time for a film distributor, which is they buy movies and then put them into theaters and on TV. And then I was like, I want to try this out. I want to see what this industry's like, because it seemed like something I would really enjoy and thrive in.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that ended up being not the case. The more I learned about that industry, there's a lot of industries, and I've just sort of bounced around since then. And I can
Yeah.
go through that whole journey that has gone from
No, you brought up something I would like to hear kind of your perspective now, 15, 20 years removed from that version of yourself you're just describing. And I think that is a thing that our audience and people will probably think about of you go to school and you get these hard skills in engineering or accounting or one of these things, but maybe it's not where you see yourself in an organization. What do you think those students should be doing, or what advice would you give to yourself back then, knowing that yeah, you're great at the math and those engineering degree is very important, but how do you marry it with maybe the business side or some of the other skills you don't get when you're so head down in a specific field?
Yes, I feel especially qualified to give feedback on this because I did have sort of like a crisis moment of like, what am I doing after I did the co-op? Because
Uh-huh.
I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. What engineering really did, and I use it every day, is it gives you a very good structure for problem solving. As an
Uh-huh.
entrepreneur, as an engineer, whatever, what I'm really good at is seeing the flaws in a system or a product and then coming up with better solutions. That is my, best skill if I have any.
Yeah.
Um, and engineering gives you that discipline to go through, okay, how do we problem solve this? What are our next steps? All those kind of things. On top of like really just pushing the boundaries of what you think you understand. And I think you could probably
Hmm.
apply that to any curriculum. If you dig further into the details of what it means to be an accountant or an engineer, you can apply the structure of those processes of making sure things are done correctly. What do I need to look for next? To be a better strategic thinker, so that anyone who's maybe not sure about what they want to do, depending on where you are in school, it's maybe too late to pivot. And I'm not saying you have to be that thing when you finish, but employers care way more that you finished it than anything.
Uh-huh.
You can get hired to do a
Uh-huh.
million other things. You don't have to be that thing. It's not your destiny, but you should
Right.
work hard while you're doing it because it shows that A, you could finish it, and your grades are an indicator of how well you could focus. So at least have
Uh-huh.
that in your toolbox when you finish, as opposed to not being focused, having bad grades, not finishing the degree is not a good look. Employers aren't going to
Right.
want to see that stuff, but it's certainly not your destiny.
So back to your destiny, how did you problem solve on your like you mentioned movies, you kind of had interests in a lot of different areas, but you had spent time being, trained to be an engineer potentially, right? And so how did you then navigate the landscape of potential careers given your background and your interests in kind of those early days post graduation?
Yeah. I'll take you from how I went from engineering student to owning a logistics company. And I will disclaim this as
Uh-huh.
saying, I don't know that I would recommend this for anyone, but knowing
Uh-huh.
how ambitious and naive my younger self was, I really don't know that I could have talked myself out of it. At least the benefit I've had is that I will I'll go and try something and I'll see if it works and then I'll just move on if it doesn't. So
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
finished school. I worked in film. We did that for about 3, 4 years. The company I was working for, I was mainly just working for the CEO, and he would get into these special projects, and then he wouldn't quite have the bandwidth to keep managing them. And then I would go in and keep them on track. I don't think fixer is the right word, more of like a special asset manager or something like that. So we kept
Mhm.
doing this stuff and we kept diversifying. We got into software. This is right around the time that iPhones came out, and it really clicked for me that all this opportunity of having these little computers in our pocket. So I started coming up with ideas, software ideas for apps, frankly. And this is back when that was a really hot thing, and it was pretty easy to get funding and all those kind of things. So I think probably on the fifth idea, I thought it was a good enough idea to run with it. It was a company called Mesh. Um, and I started fundraising, and I was able to get enough money to get it going. And then at the same time, to make extra cash, I also started consulting. So this is the beginning of a dual career of consulting and startup entrepreneurship. And on the startup side, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong with Mesh. And that's it was a really hard lesson to learn. Like those kinds of setbacks can really knock down your confidence. It takes a while to build it back up, and I certainly went through
Mhm.
all that. But we worked on Mesh, and then I worked on a bunch of other projects. Probably about a dozen over the last, like, I'd say 12 or 15 years. And then on the consulting side, it was me helping people that had ideas and capital for side projects, but really didn't have the time. So I would just do all the legwork to kind of put it together. And then that evolved into taking on a partner. And then we did sort of a mix of paid and advisory type services, sometimes in exchange for equity, sometimes just sort of like strategy, like C-suite, temporary C-suite type uh, type of thing. And then I
Mhm.
joined a boutique firm, and then right about that time, I kind of decided it was time to figure out what I didn't know, like what I don't know. I don't know. That's like a great lesson to
Mhm.
learn, is you have no idea what you don't know. So I went and got my MBA. That was 2018. I did that at McCombs, UT, while working full time. I joined a bigger consulting firm, one where I didn't have to do any biz dev because it was really hard to hunt for meat and clean the meat and be a full time student all at the
Mhm.
same time. And then when I finished, I decided that a search fund was probably the best fit for me as an entrepreneur. I'd been thinking about venture capital and private equity, which I think I would have been good at, but it's not quite entrepreneurial enough. And I think like an entrepreneur is a type of person, and I wouldn't have been
Yeah.
happy. I would have been constantly looking for ways to get more involved, and either would have.
And you probably answer that. I was gonna say, could you ever envision yourself as a career consultant, or was it too touch and go? You needed to be in the business full on, fully
I'm not going to
committed?
say I wouldn't. Being perfectly candid, my problem with consulting is that I was never given any equity. I had
Mm.
never had any upside benefit. I was locked in and kind of just told to sit in this corner and do this thing, and it just was not mentally stimulating at
Yeah.
all. And
Yeah.
and on top of that, I just didn't find it very lucrative. So, if I'm in a situation where I'm asked to do a bunch of boring work, so the work's not interesting, and then I'm not getting any sort of like, "Hey, if you kill this, we're gonna make this much more money. You're gonna make this much more money." There's no financial
Right.
upside. It was just like, it just wasn't for me. I just did not enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, a search fund, and I'm almost to the end here, is where you look for a company that is where the founder is wanting to retire, but he does not have a succession plan. So you come in, I'm the son you never had. I'll do some MBA stuff. I'll take care of your people, and I'll carry this into the future. Um,
Uh-huh.
and my search criteria was something that's a little bit antiquated, specifically on the software side, because I did a bunch of software stuff leading up to this on the in the startup world. Something that's necessary to the economy. Um, Maybe
Uh-huh.
something that's a little unsexy. Like what are people not looking at that's hidden in plain sight, and
Uh-huh.
decent money. And I looked for about 2 years. I looked at 37 deals. I'm sorry, I looked for two and a half
Wow.
years and looked at 37 deals. Pretty early on, I thought logistics looked really interesting. I thought, looking at it and looking at how the operators were working, which was very manual, too manual, and then what the technology alternatives were, which I felt were about a decade behind. It seemed like a really good fit for me because that formula of antiquated, no one's looking at it because it's not sexy enough, and all these things.
Mhm.
That's fertile ground for innovation. So I bought this company with the intention of, okay, I think I can make some improvements. This is a good company, a good starting point. And then also I think for the industry, I think that I can build some software. Being an operator gives me a great opportunity to reverse engineer a really good software solution.
Yeah.
And I bought it in November of 23. By January of 24, we were already building software.
Wow. So we'll get into that. I think we do owe it some time. Like, what advice do you have for those folks who do want to buy their own company, want to go through this search process? I mean, you mentioned the patience and the amount of deals you looked at. What's some parting advice you have for people who are interested in that or going through that?
Yeah, I mean, the first two things that come to mind, the first one is don't force the deal. Like, you are looking for reasons to say no. Like, that is your job. That is your job when you're doing your
Mm,
diligence. It's like, "This looks interesting. Why shouldn't I do it?" And if you can't find a
mm.
reason, maybe do it. Um, I forgot what the other one was, but, that's a pretty good one to stick with, when you're looking.
Yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice. I think people, especially as the time goes on, people are just looking for more reasons to buy the business and finally get going, but to have that patience. So you have that patience, you kind of set those great parameters that you were able to fit into. Walk us through, you mentioned 2024, you guys, November, you start. Where did Rockwall Services, where was it prior to owning? Kind of what, and give us the little lay of the land of the business maybe in those first couple months.
Yeah, so when you come in, uh, to a company after buying it, y it would be very foolish to immediately start changing things unless you are very familiar with that business. Which, if you're looking to buy, another piece of advice I'd say is, if you can go with what you know, go for it. For me, being a management consultant, you're forced to drop in, learn things quickly, and start adding value quickly. So that was not
Mhm.
intimidating for me. I really didn't know a ton about logistics. So I came in for the first few months, I was just an apprentice. I shadowed every employee in the company. I took a lot of notes. I mean, these are exhausting days. Like, your brain is
Mm.
fried at the end of the day. There were some days I couldn't talk and I just be like, all right, I'm gonna go home. Like it's almost 5, but I was like, there's no other progress here. I'm just gonna turn the
Right.
radio off and drive home and just be in silence for a minute.
Yeah.
Um, but that's really the first step is you've really got to learn it. And then along the way while you're taking notes, because I'm basically just building a manual for running this company.
Mhm.
Um, you start adding in ideas like, okay, maybe this could be done differently. And then that's where the eventual process improvements came from, for this company, and then also the ideas for building new industry software, which we're doing.
And so what was it doing then versus what were those improvements that you kind of thought through? All right, this is the implementation time. This is what I need to be done, or kind of how did you balance between the patience and letting the team know that you're not here to just completely rock the boat day one?
Yeah, I mean, well, day one they had a lot of questions, and I just gave them very
Yeah.
candid answers. And some of the questions were pretty funny. I was like, "Is there a dress code?" No, and now, and I'm like, "I don't care what you wear." And other ones were, like, I don't know, just like silly changes. I think I
Yeah.
come in with a good impression, wanting to make a good impression, so I'm wearing a suit, and they've, never
Yeah.
worn a suit to work, so they're just like, "What's going on?" And, so a lot of the stuff that I put in, my style is learning people's strengths. So I learned everybody's strengths first before I made any changes. Because, when you're learning their strengths, you're going to figure out their weaknesses. If you make some changes without knowing that, that's kind of a blind spot. The biggest
Mm,
change that I made initially was that everybody was a specialist, and I turned them all into generalists. Because when you have specialists, no one can get sick. So
Mm,
someone if someone can't leave, you got sick people coming in, or if someone is really
yeah,
sick and they're not there or on vacation because people should be able to take vacation, your system doesn't work anymore. So everybody's a utility
right.
player at the company now, and they weren't before. Um,
Yeah, I would have never thought
yeah.
that. So who are clients of you guys? Where do you guys fit in our world in the ecosystem, and kind of how can the audience think about where Rockwall Services might be of value to them?
Yeah, so when I bought the company, it was a freight brokerage firm, and
Uh-huh.
that was all they did. And there's a lot of freight brokerage firms out there, so standing out, you kind of find a niche, and the niche for this
Uh-huh.
company was timely and careful handling of what are called partial shipments of time sensitive or delicate cargo. A partial shipment
Okay.
is only a portion of a truck. You've got 18 wheeler, there's the whole truck, which is full truckload, FTL, or you've got a partial, which is maybe just a few pallets. There's a
Okay.
nuance to managing all that. And that's really where they fit into the market.
Yeah, and explain a little bit more about that freight brokerage world, because I mean, I that's a term maybe I was familiar with, but then when you had mentioned you were buying and starting this business, it was one that opened up a little bit more to me. What does the industry look
Yeah.
like? Who are your competitors, big versus small? Kind of give us the lay of the land
Yeah.
there.
So if anyone that's a manufacturer or an importer, which are typically manufacturers, they're going to need to move something from their factory or their distribution centers. It's going to go A to B. Some companies have their own trucks. PepsiCo, they have all their own trucks. That's kind of a popular one. That's really big. It's really expensive to operate that if you're not consistently using all those trucks. So you need to hire freelance truck drivers. And that's everything from like a mom and pop that has one truck or someone that has a fleet of like 3,000. To hire them, you need there's vetting some risk because there's a low barrier to entry to be a truck driver. So all you have to do is pass the test and buy a truck, and then you go out there and do it.
Right.
So the quality kind of varies a little bit. So you need to be able to manage risk. At the same time, there's also a lot of fraud, especially digital fraud. So you need to be able to manage that
Mm.
risk as well. And then you need to have the relationships and know how to get fair rates. All of that stuff is a lot of work. I'd say if you're a company maybe doing like 100 to 120 million per product line, you could bring that in-house economically. And
Mm.
that makes sense.
Mm.
Below that, it's probably cheaper to just hire a broker. So we have our customers that are shippers and they'll say, "Hey, I've got 8 pallets. They need to go from Dallas, Texas to Miami, Florida. They'll be ready tomorrow and they need to get there no later than Tuesday." And I'll say,
Wow.
"Okay, let me go see what I can do." I'll call our regulars. If I can't hire them, we'll go out to the job boards. We'll vet and find a good candidate. We have tools that show us what the rates are, so we know what we should be paying and what's fair. Of course, there's seasonality, which affects rates, but we're aware of that too. And then we'll go back to the customer and we'll say, "This is how much it'll cost." And we're taking what we're paying the carrier, we're adding a fee for our time to manage it. And that's it.
Uh-huh.
It's that simple. Every single shipment's like a little contract in itself. And we manage it from pickup to delivery. And then we give the proof of delivery back to the customer. And then we work on the next one. And it's really a kind of a simple process, but that doesn't mean it's easy by any means because these are people and
A lot of
trucks,
moving
and
parts, yeah.
it's managing chaos. But that's
Yeah,
that's where we
imagine.
fit in. That's what a freight broker is. We've expanded to other things since then, but that's a traditional freight broker.
So sticking in the freight brokerage piece, I go back to you as an engineer and where your mind goes of always wanting to tinker and fix things. What's broken in that industry or that model that you guys are looking to fix or improve and kind of get you excited from the problem solving side?
Yeah. So there's two things to answer there. There's operations and software. On the operations side, it's kind of related to software. There's just not leveraging enough tools to simplify the process. You really should be making it easy for your customer. But aside from that, from an ops perspective, there's a little bit of a freight broker can be a bad word. It's kind of a bad word because there are people out there that are they're kind of like garage band stock traders in their own mind where they're trying to
Mm,
sell this to their customer for the highest rate. and then they're trying to hire someone for the cheapest rate and create a margin. I don't like that model. I don't think that builds trust with the people that are
Mm,
hiring you or the people that you're hiring. We just go with a flat rate system. So we have a rate card. You find out how much it costs, you add a markup. It's a fair markup for what our services cost. And I've told every single customer, I will show you our rate card if you want to see it. Funny enough, none of them care.
uh-huh,
I think maybe just like offering was enough to build that trust. Um, Additionally, it's just communicating. A lot of things go wrong in freight. No one likes to give anybody bad news. You have to talk to them,
uh-huh.
like, especially when
Yeah,
something's wrong. I think I don't know if you've had any wealth, managers on here, but that's like the time you pick up the phone is when the market is not doing great.
bad.
And it's the
Right,
same thing for this. It's, when something's wrong, we say, I like to come to the customer with a solution. Say, "Hey, this truck broke down. We've already got another truck, coming to pick it up. It's not gonna cause a delay to the delivery. We're just keeping you in the loop." Those kind of things. That kind of good
right,
professional
right,
communication. We respond, we never react. There's never any emotion. And but despite the fact that we have truck drivers sometimes yelling at us all day and customers who,
right.
like everything's late. Everything like
Yeah,
the second
yeah.
they've given it to us, it's already late.
And then on the software side, where's the improvement?
Yeah. So, one big problem I saw is that the solutions that were out there were digitizing the process, but not innovating it. So, innovation
Uh,
in the simplest form is reducing transaction cost. So if your overhead is people using software and that software doesn't expand the bandwidth of your people, you are not innovating. You are not reducing transaction cost. So digitizing the process sometimes made it even harder to do. And there's a lot of solutions out there like that.
mm,
And because of that, it actually increased the cost. Um, Additionally, I don't see a lot of there's a thing in software called UI UX. When you open your iPhone, you touch it, that's the user interface.
mhm,
And the user
uh-huh,
experience is how easy that user interface is to work to use. A lot of the products I've seen, I mean, I saw when I first got here, when I first started vetting technology, a very big company did a demo for their software and it looked like Windows 95. And it was just like not easy to use, not intuitive. And, I was like, "Man, that just imagine the changing cost of having to train a bunch of people to use this thing." So then there's all this legacy technology because no one wants to change because it's too difficult. They've
mhm,
already learned it. They say, "Screw it, we're just gonna
mhm,
sit here." So I'd
mhm.
say a lot on the design side, both,
Okay.
between the fact that it's not making it go any faster, you're not, like, expanding your team's bandwidth, and it's just, like, very confusing to use.
So we won't steal all day. We have, you got angry truck drivers and clients demanding where their shipments are. You mentioned a few different kind of categories or services that you guys are now offering outside of just freight brokerage. Can you touch on those a little bit?
Yeah, so we've added 2 new verticals. One is bulk commodities supply chain movements. So I've brought on a partner to help me with this, but this is moving like tens of thousands of tons of bulk commodities from a source abroad, domestically. And this is something I got pulled
Wow.
into by this partner. And he was like, "Hey, can you help with this?" And he does all the ocean, and I do all the port and ground movements. So once it
Mm,
gets to port, and then how do I get it to your door? And that's been really interesting. And then we're I'm calling it a fractional transportation department. So this is probably something more for a startup, but it's I think freight brokerage with added consulting, and then by leveraging partners, we can do all the ocean freight and the customs brokerage too. So it makes us stickier. It's more of a one stop shop, and we've had again, this was something sort of bred out of opportunity. People said, "Hey, can you do this stuff?" And I said, "We're not doing that right now, but let me look into it." And it just kind of came together. So we were able to add these verticals, which has been really interesting and fun, as opposed to just getting yelled at by truck drivers all day.
yeah, yeah. So being an owner and living in this space for the past 2 years plus, growing now, and your expertise is only growing by the minute, I imagine, with every opportunity. Where, and as we tie this back kind of to the next generation of SMU grads, Where do you see opportunity in the logistics industry or the freight, the trucking, the transportation? Where do you think there's a need of good talent, and maybe advice you'd give to a younger Ryan of, hey, look into this category. There's some cool opportunity for innovation or improvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we see fraud increase, and I think this is agnostic to any industry, integrity and frankly more like face-to-face interactions are going to, I think they're going to become more popular. That's going to be much more of a requirement for doing business. I like to lead with integrity for this business. You know, I want to do what's right for my customers and everyone else.
Uh-huh.
So if you want to get into this space, look for other organizations that value that, because I think the ones that don't in the long term are maybe going to have trouble as technology starts to innovate. I'd also look at companies that are leveraging technology because it is changing. We're not the only ones trying to change it. And you know, there's only and that's for everything. AI is changing a lot. Um, there's a lot that's going to change because of it, whether we like it or not. Probably not as bad as people thought or as I initially thought. Just as the more I use AI, the more obvious its limitations are. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I would say also outside of logistics, if you're a new grad coming in and you've got that mindset that I have of like, how can we find that thing to fix? There are tons of industries hidden in plain sight that have what's called tech debt. They just do not have the technology they need. And if you can find one that has just really bad technology, that has enough potential clients, and go in there and make a better piece of software and then sell it to everyone, that in itself is a pretty good career path because you don't
Uh-huh.
have to stick with one
Yeah,
industry every time you do that. You know, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at stuff. You know, it might be a lucrative business in itself, and then you see that weak tech. You can learn this lucrative business, and then you can make that better tech, and then now you're valuable.
totally. Well, Ryan, thank you for giving us your time today, teaching us one about the freight world, the logistics world, but also about entrepreneurship, taking risks, and exploring different career paths out there. So, thank you for all you do, and looking forward to sharing your journey a little bit more and getting you in front of more people with the opportunity to work with Rockwall Services. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you to our sponsors, Sewell Buick GMC, Agility Holdings Group, Probity Advisors, Sound of a Rose, Hilltop Property Tax, Security National Bank of Texas, Boyd, Shackelford, Barnett and Dixon, Bigham Agency, Life After Ball, SMU Cox School of Business, and Mignon Steakhouse.